Hello and welcome to Take Time. I'm your host Patrick Marlett, and today we're talking about the Squale Tiger. Squale is known for two case designs in particular, their 2000 series and their 1521s, a case found on several vintage divers watches from the 60s and early 70s. However, the case we're looking at today is one that has largely slipped under the radar and is what I believe to be the most unique offering from Squale's lineup, the Squale Tiger. Apparently constructed back in the late 70s to early 80s, though examples can be hard to find, you can, however, purchase new old stock examples like the one here that have been rebuilt from the ground up. These new old stock variations of the Squale Tiger will come equipped with an ETA 2892 and a newer handset, as you can tell by the lume featured on the hands as opposed to the dial and bezel insert. Everything else about this watch is vintage. You'll also note that there are final edition Tigers out on the market which feature a different bezel and dial aesthetic as well as a sapphire top crystal. Now, I've owned both the final edition and vintage Tiger you see here in every model from the 1545s to the 1521. Above all of them, this is the watch I chose to keep. Though it's remarked as a homage, and all Squales are, of the Omega Ploprof, this design, I'd argue, is more practical and an improved look over the Omega's behemoth diver that perfects the locking bezel while still remaining functional on the wrist. Now, as with all my reviews here on the channel, I like to start with the bad and then move on to the good before giving my final verdict on a review item. So without further ado, let's talk Tiger. Though scaled down from the Omega Ploprof, the Squale Tiger is still a pretty big watch. At 44 millimeters in total diameter, that's the bezel here, and 49 millimeters at width from the crown to the outer edge of that bezel. It's 51.5 millimeters from lug end to lug end, and 11 millimeters thin with a 20 millimeter lug width. The case and bezel are of course made out of stainless steel, and the top crystal here is made out of mineral glass, keeping in touch with that vintage heritage. Now, if that's a deterrent for you, I'd recommend getting the final edition Tiger, as that features sapphire crystal. Again, inside beats an ETA 2892, and on the dial and bezel pip at 12 o'clock, that is tritium lume. The first bad note I want to mention isn't necessarily about the Tiger, but Squale's marketing, which is just awful. Even the final editions barely received much mention when they released. They'd rather crank out 12 variations of the 1545 homage diver than focus on an original design. But that tells you more about our market than Squale themselves. I wish Squale did a better job of providing the history of this piece to consumers and enthusiasts alike, so you don't have to go diving through forum after forum to scrounge up secondhand info on these watches. It's a great watch, but the actual history is sadly washed to sea. My next bad note is in regards to the proportions here, which are radical and not for every wrist. The 51.5 millimeter lug end to lug end distance is quite tall, but it's designed this way to house that absurdly large bezel, which I really love. Just know that you're getting a large wearing watch when you buy a Squale Tiger. The last bad note I have to state about this watch is on the Caseback itself. So let me just go ahead and remove this Phenomenato strap from the watch so we can take that in. The backplate here doubles as a meat tenderizer. The Caseback was likely meant for gripping onto wetsuits or onto the diver's wrist once underwater, but can be uncomfortable after prolonged wear. For this, and because the watch is so thin, I recommend strapping this onto a nylon strap, such as the Phenomenato used here. This will cover up that radical Caseback. Radical is a word I'll throw around a lot with this watch, so that you don't mess up your wrist with prolonged use. And that's about it for all of the bad notes regarding the Squale Tiger. So far as good notes are concerned, that's pretty much everything about this watch for me. I'm a huge fan of the vintage Tigers, way more over the final edition models that released just a few years back, particularly in regards to the text found on the dial. I love seeing the Squale Shark at 6 with only relevant text on the dial and the Tiger name proudly pronounced at the 6 o'clock position, as opposed to the text found on the modern final editions. I don't need to know that the crystal is made of sapphire, one of the reasons I sold that last model. It's just snobbish inclusion to have on the dial. I'd rather have relevant text here than anything like that. The high polished bezel with its blocky black lettering and the tritium triangle over at the 12 o'clock look undeniably 70s retro cool, but it's a complete scratch magnet. That's one thing I honestly wouldn't change though. A lot of vintage divers featured high polished chassis, and this bezel is just an awesome throwback to those earlier designs. The dial design here is an awesome take on the classic Rolex Submariner dial face, but with a large improvement. Upscaling the markers on the upper half of the dial from 9 to 2 make reading the time not only easier at a glance, but easier at an angle. If you're not looking at your watch top down, taking in the time is made all the easier at a 45-degree angle with the enlarged markers. I love this idea, and it works so well in practice. Beyond that, the applied markers and that gorgeous sunray dial are masterfully crafted, both equally pleasing on the eyes and functional by design. This is easily my favorite take on the classic sub-style dial face, and sadly it's not found in the final edition Tigers, it's only found here in the vintage models. The case of the Squale Tiger is equally smart by design, with a locking 60-click bidirectional bezel and oversized crown guards, likely to match that of the oversized bezel found on the front of the watch. Now, if you've been wondering why there's a big red button on the side of the watch, here's where that comes in handy. When you press this in, it'll allow you to ratchet the bezel around the dial face, where it locks into place perfectly where it needs to rest in front of those minute markings. Now, while I can't say that this is the most efficient diving bezel, I can say that in my day-to-day activities, it's seen a lot of use. Like the rest of the watch, it's practical and easy to use. Now, before I give you my final verdict on the Squale Tiger, I'm going to provide you all with a wrist shot so you can see what it might look like on your wrist. I'm not going to provide you all with a lume shot of this watch, and that's for one simple reason. The lume no longer works, or rather, it doesn't work effectively. It will glow for a little while, but it'll just dissipate in a matter of seconds. And that's because the lume is really old on this watch, and you'd have to get it relumed if you wanted to wear it diving. You can get these pressure tested to the recommended Atmos on the dial. Don't let anyone else tell you otherwise, but I personally wouldn't recommend it. You're buying this partly for the aesthetic of that tritium lume. At any rate, here is what the watch will look like on a 7¼ inch wrist for all of your admirers, and when you are going to admire it, it's going to look a little something like this. And here is the Squale Tiger on a 7¼ inch wrist. Again, this is pushing my outer limits so far as watch scale is concerned, but I think it wears incredibly well on the wrist. And I've owned this on a Milanese as well, Squale's own bracelet. It looks fantastic as well on that. I could always recommend that to you, but it looks really killer on this Phenomenato strap here, especially in this matching tone to the tritium found on the dial. It's just a great look. While I'm slightly miffed that the handset and its lume doesn't match the rest of the watch's aesthetic, the hands clearly being borrowed from a modern 1521, I couldn't be any happier with this purchase. Squale Tigers can be found on the secondhand market for $700 tops, and that's with a rubber strap or Milanese bracelet if you're lucky, like the one I mentioned just earlier. Now, this particular Squale Tiger I picked up for just under $500, and I've seen them float around that price point as well. I honestly couldn't recommend this model more. If you wanted a unique design from a brand renowned for its case making with a great modern movement in the ETA 2892, look no further. Now gang, if you found this video enlightening or in the least entertaining, feel free to hit that like button. It looks a whole heck of a lot like this guy. If you have friends, forums, or groups that were interested in picking up a Squale watch, in particular the Squale Tiger, well, feel free to share this video with them first so they can get another consumer's opinion of the watch and the brand. And if you're new to the channel, well, welcome. I do videos like this 2 or more times a week, so if watch content is your thing, feel free to slam that subscribe button, and while you're down there, you can hit the bell icon just next to that to be alerted as to when my videos air. Again, my name is Patrick Marlett, and thank you for the time.